Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the very first colloquium of this semester. And we are indeed happy to have Shri Sanjeev Sanyal for this colloquium today. Kind of metaphorically speaking, he is a person who wears many hats, but at least two of them, one as a writer and other as an economist. So he's currently a member of the Economic Advisory Council to the Government of India, to the Prime Minister, to the rank of Secretary to the Government of India. He's also the Chancellor of the Gokhale Institute here in Pune. Earlier, since 2002, he had been the principal economic advisor to the finance minister and had also formulated plans for G20 and so on. And before joining the government sometime in 2017, he had spent almost 2 decades working in financial institutions as, for example, Chief Economist for South and Southeast Asia and as a global strategist and a managing director of Deutsche Bank. And prior to that, he got degrees from Sri Ram College of Commerce of Delhi University and studied at Oxford University as Rhodes Scholar. Was awarded the Eisenhower Fellowship in 2007 for his work on urban systems and had got many awards. Maybe I'll just mention one. In 2010, he was named the Young Global Leader by the World Economic Forum at Davos. He's a visiting professor or a visiting fellow at several places, including places like Oxford, Jawaharlal Nehru University, Royal Geographical Society, and Institute of Policy Studies in Singapore. So for many of us as scientists here, we worry about how science is not particularly the major thing in planning circles. If you remember around in 2017-18, the economic survey, which is the pre-budget document that government puts out, had an entire chapter on transforming science and technology in India. And he is one of the major contributors to that economic survey, which had this part. And I didn't say much about his other part, the non-economist part, which is the variety of books that he has written. So just to give you a few of those titles: The Incredible History of the Indian Ocean, The Ocean of Churn, The Land of Seven Rivers, A Brief History of India's Geography, The Indian Renaissance, India's Rise After 1,000 Years of Decline. And there's also one storybook that I noticed, Life Over Two Beers, a collection of stories. And he has even, he had obtained Kalinga Book Award in the year 2023. So in general, for instance, there is one thing that struck me when I was reading this book, The Ocean of Churn. In the preface somewhere, I recollect this particular sentence, roughly, which says that generally history is written from the point of view of the hinterland, but here is a history that's written from the coastlines. So here we are going to see a viewpoint that is given by an insider from the government about the process reforms. And today I just noticed that his Twitter bio reads, there's one sentence which says that the Twitter handle belongs primarily to the writer and only occasionally to the economist. Today is the day of the economist, I think, and maybe for his writings, maybe you should read his books and other sources. With this, let me welcome Shri Sanjeev Sanyal for the colloquium.
So thank you, Professor Santanam, for a very generous introduction. And let me say that I'm very happy to be here. So very good morning to the management, to the faculty, the students, and I believe there are some from outside IISER as well who are here. So a very, very good morning to you. I'm very pleased to be here in what is a really beautiful campus that you have. So thank you for inviting me. The topic that I'm going to speak about is about an issue that I'm very passionate about, which is that of process reforms. Now, you know that, to keep an economy running, you have to keep running on a treadmill. You can't stop. So we have been doing a large number of reforms. This is one of the contributions which has led India to currently be the fastest growing economy in the world. But you cannot stop, because every time you do some reforms, you fill up that space that reform causes. If you want to keep growing, you have to keep doing more reforms. Now, there are many kinds of reforms that you need to do in the economy. So the question is, what are process reforms? I'm going to talk about this specific type of economic reforms because this is very often not talked about at all, not in the media, not in academia, not in general conversations. So let me first tell you what they are. See, when you talk mostly, listen, conversation, public debate, or even academic debate on reforms, you mostly hear the word structural reform. So everybody says structural reforms. Now, structural reforms are actually the very big reforms that you need to do in order to change the structure of some activity. So they can be things like introduction of GST, changes the structure of indirect taxation in India. Or introduce insolvency and bankruptcy code. It changed the structure of risk-taking and creative destruction in the economy. Or monetary policy committee and introduction of inflation targeting framework that changes the way monetary policy is done. So these are structural changes. The original 1991 reforms, when we shifted from being a socialist to being a market-driven economy, structural reform. Now, of course, these are important, but in fact, there is an entire category of reforms which nobody bothers to actually discuss, which is process reforms. These are not the big headline-grabbing reforms, or these are nuts and bolts reforms. Rule number 43C, subsection D, 3 words have to be changed. Now, other than in that little segment, nobody may even care about the existence of this reform. But in fact, as I hope to prove to you, this is where the rubber really hits the ground. You can occasionally, and of course you need to make structural reforms, I'm not arguing against them, but I'm making the point that most reforms that get in the way of ease of doing business, ease of living, or for that matter, ease of doing science. We have recently done some changes in the procurement rules. Those are all process reforms, and really, they are the real irritations in your lives, for most part. Now, oddly enough, you will be shocked to know that there is almost no literature on this subject. So you Google up process reforms, 90% of what you will find about this is actually written by me in the last few years. Now, this is odd because there is actually a huge literature on business process reform, re-engineering. So if any of you have done an MBA, you almost certainly have done a degree on business process re-engineering or some such sounding term, but you will never see anything on government process re-engineering. There are, of course, individual case studies of somewhere in the world, somebody did something and they did a case study, but there is no systematic study of this subject. So what I am attempting to do is not merely to do these reforms, but also to begin to think about this systematically, create a sort of background framework of thinking. And in order to do that, well, the easiest place to start is, of course, steal material from where they exist, which is business process re-engineering. Now, obviously, it is not you can't take it exactly and apply it, because governments are different beasts from commercial organizations. There are many other things you need to do, not the least the way you go about making changes. And of course, we have to, because we are dealing with large systems, you have to think about things like unintended consequences and so on, political stresses and things like that. But still, this is just a schema. Don't have to memorize it. You will see I will apply all of this through actual cases. But still. So the first thing to do is to identify some area where you actually need to make a change. Okay? There are various ways of deciding why that particular change needs to be done. There are efficiencies of time, the efficiencies of money. But having identified it, the next step is very, very important. It may seem obvious. Scientists will wonder why on earth people in administration don't do this routinely, but this step is not done, which is to simply map the as-is process. How does it exist today? Doesn't matter whether it's efficient, inefficient, just map it. And now that I've done dozens, if not hundreds, of these kinds of reforms, let me say that my experience is that something like 90% of the problem usually comes from 10% of the process. This is important because it dramatically eases the speed at which you can do these changes. You don't need to do structural changes, you can get away with a process change because 90% of the problem comes from 10% of the process. But identifying it is key. There's no point in doing scatter shots. You can target the bit, but you can only do it if you have done this as is process mapping. Just to give you an example of one which is live, I don't know if you have ever tried to get back shares that have got lost or you have inherited or whatever reason are unclaimed. They all end up in a fund called the Investor Education and Protection Fund. Now, this is where equity shares go to die. Getting them back is impossible. There was a lot of talk recently of trying to do something about it, and I've been pushing for this. And the default that governments like to do is just, oh, let's digitize the whole process. But you see, if you digitize it, all you are doing is fossilizing an existing inefficient process. What you actually need to do is first do this as is mapping. So when I did the as is mapping, I discovered that you actually need to do 25 steps to get your shares back. Even if it's 1 rupee worth, 25 steps you need to do. And on the 24th step, if you still make a mistake, it goes back to step 1. So not surprisingly, this body has got 1 lakh crores worth of investor money lying around, and it's accumulating dividends at the rate of 6 to 8,000 crores a year, but it is only able to return 2,000 crores a year. So imagine the amount of investor money that's just getting stuck and it's growing. This problem would not have been there if you realize that you have 25 steps. Actually, there's no reason why you shouldn't be able to do this with full due diligence in 6-7 steps. Next, having identified the problem area, of course, the next one is to make the change, and there are various ways of making the change, which I'll come to in the next slide. Then, having done the reforms, you now need to do one last step, which is again in governments very often forgotten, which is you monitor the new process and do a feedback loop. Did you manage to actually solve the problem you set out to do? And the other part, which is very important for a large system, those of you, since you're scientists, many of you will know, governments are complex systems. And in complex systems, the unintended consequences can be very often larger than this. So the strange attractor of a reform can cause all kinds of pathways to things that may be sometimes good also, by the way, but can also be bad. And that the ultimate, the butterfly effect of the change may actually cause an outcome which is in some totally different part of the system, which is an order of magnitude larger than whatever you were trying to solve. So this is very important to the last step. Now, how do you go about making the process reform? I've listed here 7 ways. I have another 8th way which I'm still thinking, but these are nothing sacrosanct. If you think of a new one, tell me. But basically, these are the kinds of changes. One is revisiting default lists and precedents. You see, any large system functions on processes that are not defined. This happens to be the way it is. Nobody knows why it is like this, but it is. And because nobody is bothering to go and look at it, it continues like this. And by the way, it can continue for generations, as I will show you. And it's highly inefficient, but that's the way it is. Next, there are actually laid out administrative processes that you can look at and can be changed. Third, there are regulations under a given law. You may need to change the regulation. Type 4, changes in legislation. You actually have to go back to Parliament to change the legislation. 5, adding capacity at some level of government to remove bottlenecks. 6, removing requirements of some state mandate activity. So the problem is caused by the government by giving a state monopoly or some mandate to an external body which causes the problem. And of course, then there are merging, closing, and restructuring outdated government agencies when, as you will see, there are literally hundreds of agencies in state level, government, central level, even municipal level, that should basically be shut down. Whatever reason they may have been created in the beginning have been now They have outlived their utility. Of course, in some cases, they were even set up without any utility for some political reason, or because Secretary Saab wanted a post-retirement gig, or whatever the reason may be. These accumulate over time and clog up the system. Now I'm going to start with examples. Every one of these examples I will give are things I have personally worked in. So I will give you some sense of the thinking behind them. So these are not theoretical things. These are things we are either doing or have done recently. So the first type that I'm going to talk about is revising default lists. Now, as I said, every system has default lists on which it functions. For example, when I was principal economic advisor, I was in the finance ministry. One of the things we used to do is to call people for consultations. Before the budget, you invite people from industry, from various parts of the economy for consultation. And there is a list of invitees to call. Now, of course, names are added every year, 1 or 2 at the margin, but the bulk of that list is static because it's inherited. Now, when I got this list to invite people, I noticed that there were several names in there of people who were no longer alive. Now, nobody bothers to cancel them out. They just remain there forever. And in addition, there were large numbers who were no longer active, etc. But they were there. You added the margin, never edit the list. So this problem is a very major problem in government. And I'm going to illustrate this point with the list of monuments of national importance. So these are the monuments that are protected under the AMSAR Act by the Archaeological Survey of India. The Honorable Prime Minister a couple of years ago asked me to have a look at them. I'm not sure why he asked me to look at them. I'm an economist. It's not my core competence, but still, anyway, he asked me to look at it, and this is what I found. The list we have as a country, 3,695 national monuments. So where did we get these monuments? It turns out that 2/3 of them were essentially inherited from the British colonial government. And of the rest, basically almost all of the rest were inherited from the princely states. Now, a handful of monuments have been added by independent India into the list, but basically the list is what it was when we became independent. So I dug further into it. So what is in the list? So it turns out that there are several monuments in our list of national monuments which are lost, missing. Archaeological Survey of India also doesn't know where it is. And it's not today. There is questions raised in Parliament in the 70s where the Archaeological Survey of India has given in writing that it doesn't know where certain monuments are. Of the rest, there are several hundred monuments which are British era graves and other obscure things which may have been of interest to the British, but we have continued to use them as national monuments. And let me tell you, this is not a trivial thing. Because you see, as soon as you're a national monument, all the rules and regulations and effort that is taken to preserve something is done at the same level as the Taj Mahal. So for example, in Nagaland, there are only, I think, 3-4 national monuments. One of them is the grave of a PWD engineer of the colonial era. It was nobody special. It was just a British junior officer who was killed by a local Naga tribesman. We don't know who this Naga tribesman was, but because at least if it was his grave, I would call him a freedom fighter or something. But this PWD engineer, whose grave is smaller than the size of this stage, there's nothing special about it. I mean, I understand if it was Victoria Memorial, there's something beautiful about it. Okay. Here, there's nothing beautiful about it. Just a random grave, and it's a national monument, and all the rules that apply to Taj Mahal apply to this. So 300 meters around it is protected. If you happen to have a house in that, you have to go to the ASI and ask for special permission to make any changes to your house. You can imagine all the harassment that happens. The greasing of palms that has to happen. Imagine all of this. So here is one concrete example of something that I looked up. So in 1857-58, you know, there was the Great Revolt. And after the revolt in 1858, Delhi was sacked by the British. And the general who did this, his name was John Nicholson. He was a brigadier general. And he carried out a major massacre in what is now Old Delhi after the British recaptured it. In fact, he killed a lot more people than General Dyer did. And so, of course, the British were very grateful to him, and they set up a statue in his name in front of Kashmiri Gate. And it was converted into a national monument. So when India became independent in 1947, we inherited this as a national monument. Now it continued to be a national monument, as I said, we don't edit lists, so they continued till in 1958, his hometown in Northern Ireland wrote to the Indian government and said, now that you are independent and you presumably don't have any great feelings for John Nicholson, can you give us his statue? So his statue was packed and sent to his hometown in Northern Ireland, where it stands, and every year, presumably on his birthday, they commemorate him, whatever. But this is not the funny part. The funny part is that the empty spot where his statue used to stand was never delisted. So it continued to be a national monument till last year. And all the rules and regulations for a national monument continued to apply to it, so that in Kashmiri Gate, if you went near there, 300-yard area around it, which is a very crowded area, thousands of houses are there. 300 yards is not small in an urban area. If you wanted to make even a small change in your house, you had to go and basically apply to the archaeological circle officer, grease his palm, and do various other things. So I discovered this as a part of my research, and you will be pleased to know that in December 2024, we finally delisted it from our national monuments. His grave is still a national monument. This is what it looks like. I'm in the process of trying to get rid of it, but you can see there's a nice blue board there, which threatens you with dire consequences if you desecrate his grave. But meanwhile, we have begun to rationalize this list. So just a month ago, almost exactly a month ago, 17 national monuments have been delisted. Most of these are actually missing. So we don't know where they are. We looked for them, we couldn't find them, so I finally at least clean the list and get rid of them. Some of them are, of course, cemetery in colonial cemeteries. There's no reason to have them. We're also adding, by the way, new monuments that should be national monuments. Now I'm going to move on to the second type of administrative streamlining. Now, this relates to where the administrative process has to be cleaned up. Okay? Now, the example I'm going to give you is that of voluntary liquidation of companies. Okay? Now, every year, new companies are set up, but it is important to remember that many companies are also closed. And 80-90% of that in every country happens to be companies that are shut down for normal, ordinary reasons, nothing to do with going bankrupt or something. It's usually something trivial like there's an old man, he's running a company, he's grown old, his kids no longer want to do that, so he wants to shut it down. Or you created a company for some special purpose vehicle for something, that purpose is over, you want to shut it down. No, these kinds of reasons. Nobody is objecting to them being shut down, and yet it used to take years to shut down a company in India. So this is an issue I looked up. I looked up it, actually I was still in the finance ministry when I looked into it, as to why this used to take long, because ease of exit is just as important as ease of entry. So I discovered the following, that there's two ways to shut down a company in India: Section 248 of the Companies Act 2013 and Section 59 of the Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code. The second is by and large used for voluntary liquidation of large companies. So I'm ignoring it here. The data is there in this presentation, but I will not talk about it. Most companies are shut down for Section 248. So I'll use this for the illustration. Basically, what I discovered is that in order to shut down a company, you had to get yourself a series of NOCs, no objection certificates. And you had to get them from, no, I don't think it's a bad idea. You can go to income tax, labor, whatever. But the problem was that you had to get them in a certain sequence and there was no time limits in all of this. So it could take you for a long time to get them. Now, after you had got all the NOCs, and as you can imagine, you had to really run from pillar to post to get the NOCs. then you had to go to the registrar of companies and ask them to put up an advertisement with your name so that anybody who may have you owe them money or whatever it is, can object in case they have an objection, they can bring it forward to the ROC. So this advertisement turned out to be the place where 90% of the delay used to happen. It could take you years to get just your name advertised. And again, as I said, you can imagine that amount of harassment and rent seeking that happened as a result of this. Just getting your name advertised. This was the real blockage. So once we discovered this, as I said, because of the as-is process mapping, what we did is, we then created a website. This happened in May of 2023. I had already moved to the Economic Advisory Council to the Prime Minister by then. But I continued doing this work. And so what we did is, we created a website from the Ministry of Corporate Affairs called CBAN. And what happens now is that if you want to shut down a company, you put your name, details, number, etc. The system then asks relevant people for NOCs. If nobody objects within 21 days or whatever it is, then it automatically generates an NOC and sends it to the registrar of companies. Next, the registrar of companies has to put up this as an ad because it gets a pre-printed list. They can object, but they have to give their objection in writing for the specific company, why they don't want it to be advertised. Of course, nobody comes up with one because you have to sign up and write a justification. So most 99% of the companies that are in the list get advertised. Look at what happens as a result of this process change. What used to take an average time of about 500 days now just takes 60 days. This happens to be the fastest in the world, let me tell you. It's faster than Singapore now. So just a simple process change, as I said, putting it up in simply digitizing the process doesn't help. You have to change the actual process. Similar thing has been done with the IBC section 59 as well. And I'm not going to get into that. Let me get to changes in regulations, which is type 3 of process reforms. Now, it may come as a great surprise to many of you, but in fact, technically working from home was actually illegal in India till 2020. Did any of you know this? Yeah, one guy knows this. It is because the Telecom Ministry had a regulation called the Revised Terms and Conditions Other Service Providers 2008 regulation, which stated that if you use the telecom lines for doing any kind of commercial activity or work-related activity, you had to take special permission from the Telecom Ministry. Okay. Now, they basically did this by defining everybody as other service providers, and that definition was very, very vague. So, pretty much anybody could be in any IT-enabled activity could be defined. Now, they were clever enough not to bother average Joe who is working from his home, but what they would do is they would go after, we have a large BPO industry, back office outsourcing industry, IT-enabled services, especially bunched up around Bangalore, but here Pune also you have quite a lot of this. Ask people who run those businesses in 2020, they had to go and get special permission from the Telecom Ministry. In addition to that, this regulation required you to have an EPA BX machine in each location. Technically, you had to get not only permission, but you had to have an EPA BX in every location. Now, many of the younger members of this audience may not even know what an EPA BX machine is. And imagine doing this in the age of cloud. You had to have a separate registration for every OSP and every location. So, supposing you were working from your bedroom and you went to your dining room, separate registration. And then there were restrictions on infrastructure sharing, which are completely absurd. I'll give you an example. You could not share the domestic and international OSP. Okay, so now let me show you completely crazy this is. Supposing you're Singapore Airlines, you have a call center in India, which many of these kinds of organizations do. Somebody buys a ticket in let's Indian national, buys a ticket in Singapore, flies to Mumbai, has a problem with the ticket, calls the call center. Now, is this person an international client or a domestic client? More importantly, how does it matter? But all of these, then there were severe fines for not complying with all of this. And as you can imagine, this was the source of thousands of crores of rent seeking. Because you had to go tell your lawyer, the lawyer had some, or CA had some system in the telecom ministry, and all kinds of shenanigans happened. I don't want to get into this. But it was a cause of major harassment, delays, compliance requirements, etc. Now, I happened to find this by pure chance. You see, when the COVID lockdown happened, the telecom ministry very helpfully issued a notification saying that the OSP regulations did not apply till the end of the year to allow people to work from home. Now, it was entirely news to me that you were not allowed to work from home. And I'm a suspicious sort of chap, by now you know. So when I read this, what I realized, what the telecom ministry was actually doing was actually signaling to all these people that they were harassing that, look, till the end of the year we are letting you off, but don't forget, you'll have to come back to us after December. That is what the real purpose of that notification was. So I looked into this and we began to change it. I had to do it in 2 rounds because it required quite a lot of pushing. But anyway, in November 2020 and then in June 2021, in 2 rounds, we have now changed it. There are now a clear definition of OSP. It has basically been limited now to voice-based BPO services, which is basically nothing now. Hardly anybody uses this. Interconnectivity, infrastructure requirements, etc. are now allowed. EPA, BX machines can be anywhere. Work from home is allowed. Remote locations are allowed. Remove distinction between domestic and international OSP. Basically, I diluted these rules down to, wow, whatever, it doesn't matter. And look at the benefit from it. A NASSCOM study in December 2021 found that 92% of IT-enabled services and BPO sector companies reported significant decline in their compliance burden. 92% of companies saw compliance burden reduction. 28% said that the compliance burden went down by 50% just because of this reform. And subsequently, in the last 5 years, you may have seen a boom in global capability centers. Well, one of the reasons we have had this is because of the removal of this restriction. Now, type 4. This is relating to something called legal metrology. Now, let me see how many of you even know what legal metrology is. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So there are 6 people in this, 7, somebody at the back. Okay, 7 people in this audience know what legal metrology is. So let me tell you that legal metrology relates to weights, measures, and labels. Every country in the world needs laws and weights, measures, and labels. We also have them. So I have no problem with the laws existing in legal metrology. But the problem is the way the rules are set up in India. Essentially, after traffic rules, this is the second largest source of small-time rent seeking in this country. So basically what happens here is that the way the rules are set up is that if you do an offense, in the first offense, say your weight is not exactly what is there in the label, or the label font is wrong, all kinds of things like that. The first offense, you can be given a small fine. It can be just 2,000 rupees. But on the second offense, you can be sent to jail for as long as 7 years. Okay, so I'll show you what happens as a result of this. Look at the table below. I have data till 21-22 and I explain why. But look at the data prior to that. Around about 1 lakh cases a year are done every year in the first instance. Okay, that's where basically for some small error you are caught, you will be given a 2,000 rupee fine. But then after that, I'm afraid you are the slaves of the legal metrology department forever. Because on your second offense, you can be sent to jail for long periods of time. And so, of course, look at the number of cases booked. 12, 5. So one lakh and the other is 3. There was 1 year, there was only 3 such cases. You're telling me nobody did a second offense more than 3 times. So, requires no great imagination to know what actually is happening. Once you're in the net, you basically have to pay a regular hafta to carry on doing business. Now, the Consumer Affairs Ministry used to publish this data every year and very proudly say, see, our rules are so good that if you have done one offense once, you never do another kind of offense again. So when I pointed out that possibility that it reflected something totally different, they stopped publishing the data, which is why I don't have data after 22. So now, in Jan Vishwas Bill 2022, we got rid of many of the provisions that had been criminalized. They are now civil fines and so on. But once the thing happened, I found that sections 30, 33 and 36 continue to be criminalized. Now this should not be surprised because 80% of the cases are under this. I just want to tell you so that you know that I don't win all my battles. But I would like to point out that I'm not making the case that all cases decriminalization may be needed. And it is true that in certain cases under sections 30, 33 and 36, you may need to actually take criminal action. If somebody is selling a packet of biscuits which says is 500 grams but is actually 200 grams and after even paying the fines, they continue to behave badly, at some level you may have to send them to jail. But you cannot have this very quick trigger. Other countries in the world also have this. UK also has criminalized provisions under these legal metrology, but you have to do many 4, 5 levels. So I'm saying at least have 3 levels, not just 2. So let's see, this is something in active consideration under the Jan Vishwas 2 bill. Let's see if that happens. But I'm just telling you that this so that you know if it gets done, that it's a battle I have been fighting for a while, and at least the first battle I did not win. Next, something that may be of interest to you. This is about increasing state capacity. Now, I commonly mock the government, but it's not the case that you don't need to add people in bureaucracy at certain levels because they may become bottlenecks. The bureaucracy may be a bottleneck in many places, but some places you need more people because otherwise that pathway is just too narrow. And one of those areas is in intellectual property rights and specifically in patents. I'm going to use patents because, of course, many of you may be interested in this subject. Let's go back to 2015, that's exactly 10 years ago, and look at what the situation was in patents. China in 2015 was doing 11 lakh patent filings a year, grants of about 3.5 lakhs. US was doing about little less than 6 lakh patent filings and granting about 3 lakh patents. India was filing only 46,900 and granting only 6,000. I mean, how can you be in knowledge economy with this level of operation? Now, obviously, it's a matter that was looked at by, actually, Amitabh Kant was then industry secretary and he took it up. And since the year 2021, I have taken it up. We have been steadily ramping this up. I will deal with the data for 23. I'll come to 24 and explain it a little later what is going on. But for 23, let's look. We have data. You can see by 23, the number of filings in China had gone up to 16 lakhs. Their grants were 9 lakhs. US, now of course you have to take this with a pinch of salt because the China allows for something called utility patents, which are low grade patents. So this is a little exaggerated number, but even if you take good quality patents, they are granting about 3 lakh patents a year. Okay, so that is about the same level as the US, which as you can see is granted 3 lakh patents a year in that year. But suddenly, as you can see, we granted 1 lakh patents a year in 2023, which is in fact more than the number of filings. Why did that happen? Because we cleared up the backlog. We really worked hard. The patent office really worked its guts out and cleared the backlog. The processes were changed. There were all kinds of provisions about opposing patents which were there, which were, you could literally wait till the last day and oppose it and then you have to go back to square one, snakes and ladders. All of those have been cleaned up. And we granted 1 lakh patents a year. So what has happened is now the patent system has become, the pipeline has become so much bigger that we now actually have a new problem, which is that we don't get enough patent filings. And you can see in what has happened in 24, we got about 110,000 patents. And remember, we can only grant about 35 to 40%. Not every patent application is going to be accepted, otherwise what's the sanctity of a patent? So let's say we do 40%, so that's what is showing through, that's the kind of patents we are now giving. 33% in fact is still of the previous few years pipeline. This 1 lakh will now begin to show. So we have a problem that we have a pipeline that is much bigger, but we do not get enough filings. But how did we get here? Well, this is what was the solution. You see, the US has 8,000 people in its patent office. China has 13,700. I think now the number is up to 14,000. We, till 10 years ago, had only 271. Now imagine a cricket game, the other guy has 14 players, you have 0.2 players. How are you going to even get into the match? Since then, as you can see, the numbers have steadily been increased. In 24-25, we added a number of people. We now have 1,383 people. We are still hiring more into this. So by the end of 26, we will have about 2,000 people in this office. And I'm mentioning this because it will then give us the capability of handling between 2 to 2.5 lakh patents applications a year, which is about roughly in a steady state equivalent to a little over 1 lakh of patent grants. The problem obviously is we do not get enough patents. So usually the government is a problem because it's the bottleneck. We're not taking ages forever to give patents. But now we have flipped it, that the government is actually waiting for scientists, researchers, particularly, by the way, from the private sector, because private sector patenting is abysmal in India. You know, in most countries, that is where most of the patent applications come from. But in India, the private sector R&D labs have been very, very poor in putting filings. But we have the capacity, and in 18, as I said, in 18 months' time, we will have the capacity to handle 2 lakh applications. We are not even getting half of that. So please, please, please put in the applications. If it is still taking a long time and it is not happening, please let me know. I will chase it up with the Director General of the Patents Office. Type 6. This is removing a state mandated activity. So most of the bottlenecks I talked about were in government, but in fact, the government's laws, rules, and other things sometimes can create a bottleneck outside of government. And I'm going to give you the example through the example of mediation. Now, how many of you even know what mediation is? Okay, a few people here know what mediation is. For those who don't know, it's a pre-litigation process, so that if there are two parties who have some dispute, instead of going to the court, they get it out of court, mediation of some sort. I have no problem with mediation. It's a good thing. Our courts are overburdened. We should have people doing mediation. No problem with that. The problem, I'll tell you, is that in Section 12A of Commercial Courts Act of 2015, we have made this compulsory. So what happens is, like, if there's a commercial disputes between two people, before going to court, they have to go for 6 months and spend 6 months basically trying to mediate. Now let me show you what happens as a result. We found data, I looked up data from 2 commercial courts in Mumbai. It's a financial capital, so this is the right place to look for it, from 2 commercial courts, and discovered that something like 98% of mediation fails. So basically, there is a near certainty that your mediation will fail and you will have to go back into the same court system. All you have done is spend 6 months paying fees, paying the mediator, and delaying the whole process to go back into a system that you anyway should have gotten into in the first place. So I am of the view that this should be voluntary. I'm not against only if it's voluntary and you're providing good quality service, will there be an incentive for the mediators, lawyers, etc. to behave themselves. But of course, they now have a monopoly and they love it. And that is why I'm not a very popular person with lawyers. I'm trying to make some changes. Let's see if that comes. But I did manage to work with the standing committee to stop this becoming also a part of the civil law. Otherwise, even for civil disputes, you would have had to go mandatory mediation. Now, type 7. Merge, close and restructure outdated government agencies. In every large system, there will be large numbers of obscure bodies that are hanging around doing nothing. As I said, they may have had some use at some point. Sometimes they were set up for reasons other than providing services. Whatever it may be, there are literally hundreds of such bodies in the government, state government, central government, every other kind of government, and every place in the world this is true. I mean, the US, as you will know, did some cleanup under Doge and Elon Musk, even if the effort has now been basically abandoned. They did shut down quite a few bodies. Say for USAID, for example, they shut down, nothing bad happened. So, similarly, we have been in government shutting down many such bodies. Here are some. Tariff Commission, All India Handloom Board, All India Handicraft Board, Central Organization of Modernization of Workshops, Rashtriya Mahila Kosh. Then we have merged these bodies, Film Division, Director of Film Festivals, National Film Archive, Children's Film Society into National Film Development Corporation, and all kinds of such bodies. Now, it's very important when you go and do this sort of thing that you have to realize that there is typically an interest group that benefits from keeping them alive. And so you have to dig in and see what is actually happening. So let me illustrate the point. All India Handicraft Board. Okay. Now, I have nothing against handicrafts. Obviously, artisans need to be supported. The question is, does this body do something? Because after all, there are many other bodies. There's Cottage Industries Emporium, there's Khadi Udyog, there is state governments there's Silk Board. There are all kinds of bodies that are looking at artisans. So the question is not whether the activity is worth supporting or not. And there are bodies in central government, there are bodies in state government, there are all kinds of bodies, there are private sector NGOs, all kinds of bodies working in this space. Question is, does All India Handicraft Board do anything? So when we shut it down in 2022, I think, there was at its head a Mumbai-based socialite who had been the chairman of this for around 20 years or something. So she then wrote a social media post basically saying, oh my God, this government is fascist. It does not like artisans, etc. And the usual tropes. So when she wrote that, the then textile minister under whom all this came, which was Smriti Irani ji, she wrote a simple rejoinder basically stating, Madam, if you can give us the minutes of any meetings of this board that has happened in the last 7 years under your leadership, we will reopen and re-establish this board. We are still waiting for it. Because there are no minutes of the board having ever met for years on end. So the point is not whether the activity is good or not. The question you must always ask is whether this body does something useful. Same thing for Tariff Commission. Of course, any country has tariffs on imports and so on. There is a president in a Western country who needs perhaps a tariff commission. But question is, does our tariff commission do anything related that is useful? That is what is the interesting question, no? So again, I looked into this issue and I found something very interesting. You see, this tariff commission had nothing to do with our tariff setting at all. So to understand this, you need to look at some of its history. You see, till 1991, we were a socialist country. So there were many commodities whose prices were set by the government. So whether it's cement, various grades of steel, various grades of aluminium, etc., etc. And so to set those prices, there was a body called the Bureau of Industrial Cost and Pricing. Those who are older in this audience may remember this name. It was a very powerful body because it could make or break an industry by just a few rupees up and down pricing, and that economics of that industry would make or break. So you can imagine what used to happen in that body. It was one of the bodies that was very powerful. It was headed by a very senior secretary level official. It had some 300 plus people working, officials working for it. They had 2 floors in that ugly building behind Khan Market. So this was a really powerful body. And overnight, in 91, after the reforms, all these prices became market driven, so this body had nothing to do. But of course, nobody bothered to shut it down, so it hung around for several years in the system till it decided to rename itself as the Tariff Commission. The problem is that it was simply not in the chain of command of anything to do with tariffs. You see, tariffs in India are set between the Finance Ministry and the Commerce Ministry, and perhaps if there is a industry body, pharmaceutical, whatever. DPIIT, which is a department that looks at industry promotion, has nothing to do with the chain of command. And Tariff Commission, because it's a part of BICP, was a part of the industry promotion department. It is simply not part of the conversation. So when I discovered this in the middle of COVID, when I discovered it, and I wrote a note saying that it should be shut down, the lady who headed this organization got very annoyed and complained about me to the cabinet secretary. So I said, look, I have nothing personal. I don't even know this person. Any case, there's a government department. When you shut it down, nobody loses their job. They'll just get reallocated somewhere else. But this body, what is the purpose of this body? So anyway, since there had been so many complaints about me, there was an online meeting which the cabinet secretary held, where he called the chairman of the Central Bureau of Indirect Taxes and Customs and a representative of Commerce Ministry, the secretary I think it was, and asked them that, look, you guys set up the import tariffs of the country. So tell us, do you use this Tariff Commission? Because the Tariff Commission people are saying that they are writing these reports about tariffs, etc. So both of them clearly stated that they had never heard of the Tariff Commission. So that was the end of that argument, and the Tariff Commission was shut down in 2022. Nothing terrible has happened as a result of this. So now I have given you, as you can see, 7 different types of reforms that can be done and typologies, how to go about doing these reforms. I've shown you many examples, all of which, as I said, I personally worked on. Many of them have worked. We have given you data to show that they are functioning. Some of them I have not succeeded. But the idea here is to show you that process reforms are absolutely key. Every large institution has them. Recently, for example, we did these process reforms that you may be aware of how to buy equipment for scientific institutions. And there used to be almost rules and regulations applying to this which were similar to the ones used for buying furniture through GEMS portal. Now, obviously, it doesn't make sense. And, I'm sure most scientists were spending their time trying to navigate GEM portal than navigating the corridors of science, right? And you may have discovered that the frontier of knowledge is far simpler than the frontiers of GEMS. So I hope you now have more respect for those who navigate the bureaucracy. Maybe I can help you with quantum physics. So with that, let me come to the end of my presentation, and I'm very happy to answer questions.
Phenomenal talk, and is very new to probably many of us, at least to me, but you explained it in a very nice and lucid manner. So what I wanted to know, 2 things. One is that the way you portrayed things is, although you have been in a different role as an advisor, but you picked up different kinds of reforms yourself.
Yes.
My question is that whether it was on a voluntary basis or something instigated you to do that, or whether anyone else in your capacity or in the same level as you work can also take up those challenges themselves and solve it if they want to. There's the first question. Second question is that you didn't mention about the hurdles that you faced. It seemed too easy the way you explained to it. So these are the two questions.
So let me be absolutely clear. None of this would happen unless I had the backing of the highest political office in this country. Without the Honorable Prime Minister and his team, I would not be able to do any of this. After all, who would listen to me? So let it be clear that the top political leadership wants this. And I'm able to push through these reforms precisely because I have their backing. So let me make it clear that yes, of course, I may have personally been interested in doing these, but I would have not been at all effective but for the backing that I have received. Interestingly, for all the mocking I do of the bureaucracy, there is a segment of the bureaucracy that has been very, very helpful to me and has not only backed me, but many of these solutions that I have talked about are actually theirs. Very often they cannot articulate it because of their service rules, but I have done it on their behalf. So let me say that many of these things would not have been possible without the backing of the bureaucracy itself. And indeed, this exact presentation was done just 1 week ago in Labasna, in Mussoorie, where the IAS officers are educated. The new batch of joint secretaries were given this presentation. In fact, I'm documenting many of these into working papers of the Economic Advisory Council to Prime Minister so that these can be taught. So we are institutionalizing this kind of thinking. And the reason I'm coming and making this point to the wider population is one, to of course tell you that we are doing this kind of thing. But you see, the most important thing we're trying to do is to try and create a culture of problem solving. We tend to assume that some system works the way it does because it's somehow God-given. It's not. We human beings, we citizens of India have created this. There's nothing God-given about it. Forcing these changes is something that at your level you can do. The very big changes may have to be done from the top, that there will be all kinds of changes you can do at various levels. I'm 100% sure, even in IISER, there are processes that will be much better run. Change them. The whole system begins to work much more efficiently with all these small changes in the system. That is the point about process reform. You do not need to make structural changes to make the system work. You do sometimes, but for the most part, you don't.
Good morning, sir. And I'm very happy that you were openly saying that we need to still grease palms of people, although you're working with the Prime Minister. My question is...
we are not blind to the system.
Yeah.
Our problem is not to be blind to it, but to fix it.
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
So my question is, when you set up laws like farm laws, which are also process reforms...
that was a structural reform.
Okay.
Major fundamental change in the way our farm markets worked.
Yeah, so in such cases, there was a revolt from the public because the thing is communicated in a different way that makes the government an evil. So how do you battle these kind of things?
No, so obviously you have to communicate. So
yeah, I'm saying that the government was not able to communicate it well because of which this chaos happened. And how do you tackle these kind of problems?
So one important thing, you're right, communications is important. So take, for example, farm reforms. The bulk of farmers actually would benefit from it. A small number of farmers, in fact, they were not even probably farmers. They are actually the people who run the mandis. They want to continue running the monopoly of those mandis. The farmer actually, we are not shutting those mandis down. All we are doing is ending the monopoly of those mandis. All we are saying is you can go to those old mandis if you want. We're not shutting them down, but you can go to some other place also. It tells you something very important and interesting about doing these kinds of reforms or any kind of reforms, which is that a small group of organized insiders can easily scuttle what may be good for the wider public because the insiders are organized. The general public or even the people who are the beneficiaries, because they are not organized, may not be able to ask for the changes they want, even though there are thousands of people who are benefiting and only a few dozen who are hurting. Those guys, because they are incumbents and organized, they will be able to scuttle it. So the first problem that you face is that when you make the case for such changes, one is, you're absolutely right, one of them is that you have to communicate it. You have so, and in the hope that people will stand up for you and the beneficiaries will stand up for you. Obviously, it doesn't always happen, but you are right. All these changes required, after all, to push back against somebody who benefited from the existing system. And it does require effort. And I think even in the first question, the point was made. Yes, it's not as easy as I may have made it sound. Each one of them required going back over and over and again. I write very often, reach out to the public. One of the things you may notice I do, you can Google it up, is many of these reforms, I actually publicly write them out. The reason for doing this is very simple, that the public, when I write them out, very often there is, I get good response for some of these reforms. So therefore, already I've created a mahal, so to speak, where there are people asking for reform. For example, I have written about, say, for example, changing the way EPFO functions, or IIPFA I mentioned. In all of these, by the way, I'm criticizing my own government. Why am I bothering to do this? Some people write very often, oh, why does he write about this? Why is he writing? Why didn't he change it? Reason it's important to write about them in public is because otherwise, when I make that change, I haven't prepared the public for why I'm doing it. So it is very important to write in public domain and make the case, whether by coming out and speaking to the public directly, or writing in newspapers about it, or podcasts, or whatever it may be. It is important to explain the kinds of changes we make. Yes.
माफ कीजिए सर, मैं अपनी बात हिंदी में रखूँगा।
हाँ, रखिए।
आपने सर यहाँ उल्लेख किया है कि मर्जर किया है NFDC के साथ कई ऑटोनोमस बॉडीज़ का, तो सर उसमें मैं आपको ये फीडबैक देना चाहूँगा और प्रश्न करना चाहूँगा कि सर मर्जिंग के बाद वहाँ की स्थिति बदतर हो गई है सर। वहाँ अभी जैसे NFI जो कि पूना में ही स्थित है, वहाँ पे स्किल्ड स्टाफ नहीं रहा, फोटोकॉपी के लिए पेपर एक महीने तक नहीं आते हैं, और जो उसके यूज़र्स हैं वो बहुत परेशानी में हैं। तो ये सर जो मर्जर किया है उसके बाद इसमें सुधार कब आएगा सर?
देखिए, वो पहले भी नहीं चल रहा था, ये नई बात नहीं है। जब मैंने ढूंढ के ये निकाला, वहाँ ये बदतर परिस्थिति पहले से ही थी, और उसको सुधारना कोई आसान काम नहीं है। और यहाँ बहुत सारे ऐसे बॉडीज हैं, जैसे चिल्ड्रंस फिल्म सोसाइटी। आपको याद भी है कि लास्ट टाइम चिल्ड्रंस फिल्म सोसाइटी के बनाया हुआ कोई एक फिल्म आपने देखा है? वो एक 1980s में आता था, एक चिड़िया, वो वाला याद है? हाँ, वही लास्ट सबको याद होगा। और उसके वजह से कितने सारे सेपरेटिस्ट मूवमेंट्स खड़े हुए वो सुनने के बाद। इतना इरिटेटिंग गाना था वो। उसके बाद आपने सुना है कुछ? उसके 40 साल निकल गए, कुछ प्रोड्यूस नहीं किया है, पड़ा हुआ है। उसी तरीके से ये आर्काइव जो आप कह रहे हैं, पड़ा हुआ है, कोई उसको देखता नहीं है। तो पहले है कि सब पड़े रहते हैं। ये उस सोसाइटी के जो ट्रस्टीज या जो भी लोग हैं, वो लोग पैसा लेते हैं, उसमें बजट में पैसा जाता है, कहाँ जाता है? तो इसीलिए सब मर्ज करके अब नेशनल फिल्म डेवलपमेंट कॉरपोरेशन में गया है। उसमें बहुत पुराने लोग थे जिनको धीरे धीरे रिटायर कर रहे हैं, तब उसको साफ करके वो करेंगे जो भी करेंगे। करने की जरूरत तो है, लेकिन अभी के स्टाफ से वो नहीं चलेगा।
Thank you for a very nice talk, sir. I had a question about this recent reform in easing procurement of scientific equipment and consumables.
Yes.
I was wondering whether there is any proposal to extend it to services. I'll give you a specific example. I'm an astronomer, and we are building software for an international billion-dollar telescope. And that software, therefore, has to be built at scale, has to be built via collaboration with industry. So if we can extend the procurement of scientific equipment to scientific services like software and so on,
makes
that would
perfect
be very
sense
beneficial.
to me.
Yeah.
Push for it, you will get it. The principal scientific advisor is the person to contact. I can't see why we should not be able to do this. But I don't know enough about a specific case. But as a general principle, I am with you.
First of all, thank you for coming here to my institute. I am a student who is studying at the time artificial intelligence and data science. So you talked about re-engineering processes, whether in business or in government, but you're interested in this. So I would like your opinion as to what role artificial intelligence and autonomous systems can play in this, and whether the government of India would be willing to fund such startups if they were to ever arise.
So, as you may have seen, I don't deal with artificial intelligence. I mostly deal with natural stupidity. But of course, artificial intelligence can be used in many of these processes to smoothen them out. And they are being used, by the way. We are using some of these to simplify processes, answer questions. For example, many government services are creating LLM systems that can answer common questions and so on, not the old FAQ method. So they are being used. It's not that they are. As far as startups are concerned, there are systems that we have in Startup India. Now, whether they will fund this, your specific idea, I don't know. That will depend on your idea, and you'll have to, there is a process of applying. You can apply and see what happens. But, as a general principle of using artificial intelligence for improving things, yes, we are already using them for many things. Yeah. Yes.
Thank you for a really wonderful talk. Great anecdotes, really entertaining. And much of it resonates also with the kind of reforms we would like to do in our institutions. Two questions for you. First one, could you give an example of the butterfly effect, the unintended consequences of any of the reforms you might have tried to push, and how do you manage them? And secondly, answer this and then I'll get back to the second one.
So one of them is you have to look, as I said, you have to do feedback loops. So for example, when a process is very inefficient, one default thing that you may want to then do is to digitize. Okay? Everybody says digitize. Now, if you do not actually clean up the system and you digitize the existing process, very often we actually may worsen the situation, because the old system, because it was manual, allowed you at least to bypass it in some fashion. Now you have hardwired the system. So you have hardwired a bad system. And so the unintended consequence is that you have worsened the situation. So this is just one example of what may happen in this. And that is why you have to look at what you are doing. You have to do that mapping that I told about. And you have to do the post facto monitoring of what happened as a result. Many of the things we have digitized have ended up making things worse, if anything, or at least not better.
So the follow-up question on that is, when you actually start implementing the reforms, a lot is left to interpretation of the new rules, the reformed rules. How do you teach our administrators the art of interpretation? Because many times we feel
both
that
interpretation, actually more than interpretation, the feedback. And it may be a human thing, but this definitely happens in the government, is that there are large egos involved. And so you make a change, it leads to a worse outcome, but you can't go and fix it now in the second iteration, because this will make Secretary Saab look bad. So you're stuck with this ridiculous system till this person retires, and then the next person hopefully has a different view of the matter and can change it. Now this is an absurd situation, because what we really need is a problem-solving mindset, not a Tughlaqi Firman mindset. So this is a human problem. It's not anything to do with anything. It, by the way, exists in every other country in the world. It's not that it doesn't. I mean, we are getting all kinds of similar diktats on tariffs around the world. But fact of the matter is, we do, therefore, this has to be taught and made up. This feedback loop part has to be made a part of the process, so that you force this, that when a change is made, you have to say that after a period of time it has to be relooked what happened as a result. You have to have sunset clauses sometimes. That if it is a temporary problem you're trying to solve, you insert it, then it may remain forever. I'll give you one example. We are a country where our fertility rate and birth rates are now below replacement. You are in a state where it's drastically below replacement. Maharashtra's birth rates are as bad as those of Japan. People may not realize this. And yet we still have across the country population control programs. Ridiculous. We should be shutting them down tomorrow morning. And I've been saying this publicly over and over again. And yet they continue. There are, when I try to push for this, there are many lobbies, particularly in the medical side, who have entire budgets being given by population control departments. Now, this is a ridiculous situation. By the way, nothing unique. Even in China, one-child policy was only removed 10 years ago, by which point China already knew that it had a demographic problem. So, this kind of thing happens all the time, and you need to have sunset clauses. You need to have feedback loops. Otherwise, as I said, the problem I deal with is not artificial intelligence, but natural stupidity. We should go somewhere to the left, otherwise I'll be accused of being right-wing. Yeah, them, and then we can take one last question from there. Yeah.
Sir, basically, in the Indian FDI rules regarding e-commerce, is that we restricted to only marketplace segment, not and inventory based is not allowed. So, like, are we not reducing the market size of e-commerce in the first place by placing these regulations on FDI? In a case like we should be promoting FDI in the sector more.
So I don't know the details of the particular sector. This is a highly specialized question. So I'm sorry, I am not able to answer that because I don't know enough about that particular issue. I have not researched it. So you'll have to excuse me. Yes, next.
Okay. So this is regarding the topic was Viksit Bharat via reforms. So I would like to know from you your advice to the youth once Bharat becomes Viksit in next 2 years, 5 years. At least we'll be number 3 in 2 years' time, and maybe who knows, number 2 or number 1 in before 47.
So the reason for this Viksit Bharat idea for the next 25 years is, of course, the coincidence that in 2047 will be 100 years as a independent country. But it happens to be that this is also the 25 years in which we will be at our demographic peak. We are already into it as of this year, and we will exit it in about 25 years and around 2050 when we will exit our demographic peak. Consequently, this is our moment in history to really ramp up the economy and get it going. It happens to also be that we have some momentum into this. So we already have grown, as you mentioned, to the 4th largest economy in the world as of this year. And we expect that in the next 24 odd months, we will go past Germany to become the world's 3rd largest economy. Helped partly by the fact that Germany is not growing, so it's not entirely only our effort. But fact is that even when we become the 3rd largest economy, do be clear that the big 2 are far bigger than us. So it will really be an effort for the next 2 decades odd, where it is mostly the people in the back end of this audience who will be doing the hard work. I am already where I am. Maybe another 5-10 years I will be doing my part in the system, but it's really the people sitting at the back of this hall that will be doing the heavy lifting during this period. And so the main point I'm making here is that this requires a serious effort. Whether it's our infrastructure, physical infrastructure, our scientific infrastructure, our private sector's entrepreneurship and risk-taking, this really requires a big effort. From the entire country, it has to be an all-of-country effort. This thing that I hear often, if we only solved education, the whole thing will work. If we solved nothing, the whole thing has to work. For example, if our legal system doesn't work and it doesn't enforce contracts in time, it does not matter what the rest of you are doing. It will become it is already such a big hurdle in the pipeline that the rest of the system will not be able to deal with it. So we have to think about it holistically. We have to get the whole system to work. If we do it, we have a genuine chance in the next 25 years of establish ourselves. Now, whether we, what size, how close we are to the big two, I don't know. But it will be an opportunity that we will have, particularly given that, at least in the case of US and China, they have their own problems. It's not like their life is also perfect. China, for example, will go through a massive demographic shrink. And that is also true of other countries, by the way. And you must understand how powerful these forces are. So just to give you an example, South Korea currently has a birth rate which is 1/3 of the required rate. Now, this is not a trivial thing. It means that in one generation, its population will drop by 2/3. Okay, very simple. If 2 people have 1 kid, it's a halving of the population in one generation. You don't need to be a great scientist to know the maths of this. So now, when that happens for South Korea, it will be so bad that they will not be able to keep their university systems running, for example. You need a minimum threshold. In fact, in certain areas, you will not be able to keep municipal services running. Already happening in Japan. There are large number of villages in Japan, in Italy, where you can go to Italy and buy an entire village for €1. They'll give it to you. Because it's so expensive to run the place, nobody wants to buy it. Same thing is happening in Japan. You can go and buy yourself a nice house in Japan. Your problem will be no municipal services. And repairing the place will cost you a few $1 million, so nobody wants to take it, even if it's giving it to you free. So this problem will happen to China too. China already has entire cities that are not populated. I don't know if you know this. They overbuilt over the last decade, past their requirements, and now their population is shrinking. So those entire cities will never be occupied, or they're half occupied. Now people don't understand. You see, we live in a very crowded country where everybody is struggling so much for all the services. We do not think of the opposite problem at all, which is actually an even worse problem because it spirals downwards. You cannot keep that infrastructure running. Therefore, it deteriorates. It deteriorates. Therefore, you cannot run it even further, and so on. The downward spiral is very painful. And to give you some sense of it, today, China and India have roughly the same population. We have just gone past this last year. So they have 1.4 billion people in China. Do you know what the expected population is at the end of this century? 600 million. Think about it. How painful that would be. Now, reversing this is actually very tricky. First of all, the social structures in China have changed to such an extent that you now have 2 generations that have grown up without siblings. Okay? One-child policy. Not only have you not had a sibling, your parents have also not had a sibling. It's in your grandfather's generation, maybe your grandfather has a brother or sister. So now, this conception of having siblings has broken down. Not only that, because you have grown up without having to share your life with anybody, they have found that the young Chinese do not want to marry at all because they're not used to the conception of sharing their life with anybody else. I mean, anybody who's grown up fighting with their brother or sister is good practice for married life. Yeah. And you learn that having an argument doesn't mean that you don't like those people. Yeah. You may love your sister, but you can still have a fight with them. It's okay because you get on with it. Now, that is something that is so obvious and natural that people who have no experience of it simply are not able to deal with the fact that they have to share life with other people. So it really breaks down society in ways that China is now finding it difficult to reverse. These are very powerful sociological forces. So one-child policy was removed a few years ago. Then they have now created a 3-child policy. You can have now, it doesn't matter because nobody has having kids. They're just not getting married. So this kind of thing can be very, very powerful engines of change. In fact, this is one of the reasons I'm saying, in anticipation of the fact that our population will stabilize and then begin declining, we too should begin to get rid of population control, because initially it shows no change. But do remember, just to show you how things are, do you know when there was a peak in the number of babies born in India? Guess when it was? Yes, 2001. So it is already 25 years back that the peak number of children born in India was. Those people are now entering the workforce today. That is the point about the demographic, and they'll be in the workforce for the next 25 or 30 years. That is our demographic peak. But do remember, the pipeline is dry. And to give you a comparison, that peak was 29 million babies born in 2001. Today it's gone down to somewhere in the 22, 23 range. So already been a massive drop in the number of babies born in this country. And to give you a comparison, in China it's fallen to 8 million. Their peak was somewhere in the 1970s, I think. And so it is in steep decline. So these are the dynamics that will play out. And my own view is that you can talk all you want about artificial intelligence, robots, and all of those kinds of things. If there are no human beings, there's no final demand. Robots producing goods for other robots can't keep an economy going. So there has to be some final demand for their product. So therefore, yes, we have many, many problems, but do remember that other countries have their own problems. I talked mostly about demographics in China. China has many other problems too. And of course, the US has many problems too. I mean, the internal political breakdown of Western world and sociological breakdown of the Western world, which is reflecting in what you are witnessing in those countries, is quite significant. You have to go back all the way back to the Roman Empire. And if you read about the later Roman emperors, you will see that there are echoes with what is happening to today's West. The Roman Empire was an overwhelmingly powerful empire, lasting over centuries, during which basically there was no chance of anybody invading and defeating them. And yet, from the point of their peak to the point that they all fell apart, happened within a few generations. And during those generations, you had emperors coming, getting assassinated, another emperor coming, two emperors turning up, fighting with each other, and so on. So these kinds of breakdowns of civilization happen very, very rapidly. Happened here in India repeatedly as well. You are living in the city which experienced this. The Maratha Empire reached its peak very, very quickly with taking advantage of a similar breakdown in the Mughals. But they themselves then fought amongst themselves, and within a few decades of their peak, the British had defeated them and taken over the empire. So these breakdowns, socio-political breakdowns, once it goes past a certain point and goes into downward spiral, can be very powerful. So this is a warning to us as well. There is nothing inevitable about our rise. Even the demographic peak that I'm talking about is a limited one for 25 odd years, and we are already into it. So we have to take advantage of it. Taking advantage of it requires a certain socio-political consensus, and we have to hold it together for a long period of time to get to the other side. There's nothing inevitable about anything about history. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.
I'm sure there are many more questions, but he has to take a flight, so we'll have to stop that here. And thank you, Sanjeevji, for the very interesting talk. For each of these types, I was relating to something here. I'm sure many people here do relate to things locally within the city and so on. I request Director IISER Pune, Professor Sunil Bhagwat to come and present a memento. Thank you very much. Thank you to everyone.